Okay, the second type of abrogation, which we mentioned, was the ruling is abrogated, but it's still recited. Some of you mentioned like the ayahs that mentioned the different stages of making alcohol haram. Here is an ayah of the Qur'an where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is in Surah Al-Baqarah. So this is, oh, wait a minute, I made the thing too big. Okay, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking, this is of course a translation of the ayah. And those of you who die and leave behind wives should bequeath for their wives a year's maintenance and residence without turning them out. This is the ayah, وَالَّذِينَ يُتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ. And if you've memorized Surah Al-Baqarah, you know there are two ayahs that start this way. One is actually abrogated by the other. And the order in the Mushaf, the second one in order is the one that's abrogated in ruling. And the first one that occurs to you if you're reading it in order is the one that remains in ruling and in recitation. So it's the second one. وَالَّذِينَ يَتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا وَصِيَّةً لِأَزْوَاجِهِمْ مَتَاعًا إِلَى الْحَوْلِ غَيْرَ إِخْرَاجٍ. That's the abrogated in ruling. Definitely not in recitation because it's part of the Qur'an. We read it, right? We read it in Salah, we read it in the Khatma, it's written down in every Mushaf. Okay. So this ayah is talking about, let me continue reading it, without turning them out, but if they, i.e. the wives, leave, there is no sin on you for that which they do of themselves, provided it is honorable, and Allah is the Almighty, All-Wise. So this is an ayah, this is in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is Surah number 2, ayah 240, probably by the counting of Al-Kufi count. Okay, so here's an ayah that's the ruling is abrogated, but we all recite it. So inshallah, this is a clear example. The last one, we already said an example when we said the first one, but here's an additional one where only the recitation is abrogated, but the ruling remains. So an example for that would be the 5 breastfeedings or the following story. So Ubay bin Ka'b, remember Ubay became Muslim later on, right? He's from Medina. Ubay bin Ka'b states that there was an ayah in Surah Al-Ahzab that they used to recite. And he recited it. He said, and the elderly man and the elderly woman, if they commit adultery, then stone them. And then there's the word al-batta, which I didn't know how to translate. And I couldn't find this is actually my own translation of the hadith. I couldn't find it translated anywhere that made me comfortable. So I apologize, I couldn't translate the word al-batta. I need to look into that, possibly maybe tonight and add it in. So then stone them. Al-batta might be definitely, but I'm not sure. Then stone them, a punishment from Allah, and Allah is the Almighty, All-Wise. This now is not in Bukhari and Muslim, but it's in Al-Tabari and Ibn Hibban, and all those sources are used, they said it is Sahih. So it is a Sahih narration where Ubay bin Ka'b recites an ayah. He said, this is an ayah we used to recite in Surah Al-Ahzab. But notice how he just, he said, we used to recite. So this is not any surprise. They knew about abrogation and they had memorized it. Ubay bin Ka'b is one of the major Huffaz. So of course, we would expect him to have memorized it. And he's saying, we used to recite it. We no longer do it. And it used to be written. It's no longer written. Who abrogated it? It's from Allah. How do we know it's abrogated? By Ubay bin Ka'b stating it. And also, definitely by the final review of the Prophet ﷺ with Jibreel, anything abrogated was not included. So that was why it was so important that Zayd bin Thabit be there during that final review, okay, where he witnessed and listened to the Quran being recited from beginning to end. Whatever was mentioned was Quran, and whatever was not recited was not Quran. And clearly this ayah was not part of that final review. If you're interested in the Arabic of it, I have it written here as follows. الشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فارجموهما البتة نكالا من الله والله عزيز حكيم. That's what I have in this text. And the different hadith that mention it have a slight difference in variation in words, which happens when it's just a hadith and it's no longer Qur'an. Then, you know, the ummah doesn't give it its importance of maintaining every single word exactly verbatim. A hadith, by the way, is acceptable to transmit it in close meaning. That's considered acceptable in a hadith. Wallahu a'lam. Al-batta, under no circumstances. It doesn't fit the siyaq. It doesn't fit the context. So it might be a variation of that. I'll need to look it up, inshallah. Indefinite, it would be more like definitely, not indefinitely. Wallahu a'lam. We'll need to see how the context of different translations can fit into this one, inshallah ta'ala. I just wanted to make sure that everyone now understands what abrogation is and why we're talking about it. Why is it we're talking about abrogation? Because the two types that include where it's not recited anymore, and if it's not recited, it's not written anymore. So that affects our timeline of history. So now think about it. So there's an ayah such as the one right in front of us now that the companions recited and wrote down, and it got abrogated. So they're not reciting it anymore, and it should not be written down anymore. But sometimes if a companion memorized an ayah and traveled far away, they might continue to recite it, which will give us understanding of what comes next in history, inshallah. Okay. So Alia says, while discussing the second one, I heard you mention this may be a Kufi count. Yes, you're right. I said that and I was like, no one asked me about it. Quickly go to the next slide. Okay, yes, I did mention the Kufi count. You're curious about what that means. I'm sure, okay. No, you're right. I said it's ayah 240 by the Kufi count. Let me open my Mushaf and make sure it is the Kufi count. And I'll tell you why I said it's probably by the Kufi count. Just give me a second here. So ayah 240. Yes, it's 240 by the Kufi count. Okay. I don't think I have it designed in my course to talk about counting of the ayat, but I might include a little bit about it since we're talking. Okay. Part of the transmission of the Qur'an is that the Prophet ﷺ would teach the ayahs in their separate form. Like, so this would be one ayah, and then the next ayah, and then the next ayah. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't recite, for example, Surah Al-Fatiha all mushed together like we hear some Qur'an, which is acceptable. It's okay for some Qur'an to say, for example, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. That's acceptable, but that's not how the Prophet ﷺ read the Quran, and it's not how he taught the Quran. He would read the Quran ﷺ and teach it ayah by ayah. What does that mean? That means that each ayah is a separate entity that should be tracked. That's number one. Number two, there are narrations that the Prophet ﷺ was seen counting with his fingers. And they even described the method of counting to be the counting of so-and-so tribe. I looked up the counting of so-and-so tribe. I can't remember names. I'm really bad at names. But the name of the tribe is actually mentioned. I just can't remember it right now. The way they would count is by starting with a clasped fist and then open the fingers one at a time. Okay? That counting is versus starting with an open fist and then clasp the fingers one at a time. Do you understand? So that's considered a different method of counting, and it's tribal. It depends on a different tribe. So different tribes would just count, showing or represent counting a different way. So the way the Prophet ﷺ would count the ayat in this one narration is start with a closed fist and open his fingers, starting by his pinky and then the next one and the next one, and ending with his thumb. And then if there were more than 5 ayahs, then he would clasp the thumb and then sababa, what's sababa? The pointer, I think it's called, and then end with his pinky. So that's considered a method of counting. And he would do that while reciting the Quran and teaching it. And a lot of narrations from the Sahaba and mostly from the Tabi'een, that they used to teach the Quran, and even sometimes were seen in Salah grasping their fingers, out of habit probably. So the transmission of counting the ayat was learned from the Prophet ﷺ along with the ayah. Okay, now if we know that, and if we know that there are different ahruf, it's completely along the same understanding to know that the Prophet ﷺ taught the counting of the ayahs to different Sahaba in different ways. So an ayah might be one full ayah to one Sahabi, but be counted as 2 different ayahs intentionally to another one, causing that this surah might have in one variation 5 ayahs, but in another one it's counted as 6 because this certain ayah was actually split in 2. And that's very acceptable, that's normal. So that's why we have the different counts. I didn't plan this lesson. This was, I brought it on myself. I said 240 in the Kufi count. I could have just not said anything. Inshallah, now that I mentioned it, inshallah, I will add it to the slides. It's not, I don't think it's in the lesson plan. I will add it, inshallah. There are, to my knowledge, there are 6 counts, 6 ways of counting that are affected by qira'at. So when you learn a qira'ah, you need to learn the count that goes along with that qira'ah. So it's actually very much tied into the history of the Quran. I don't know why I didn't have it in the original presentation. Okay, lesson learned. Lots of lessons learned. Prepare well, let's say that. Okay, inshallah, I hope I answered your question to a degree that makes you feel fulfilled, but inshallah makes you excited about more, inshallah, in the future. Barakallahu fikum. Okay, we were talking about abrogation and the effect that would have on the written Quran and recited Quran.